All right. Good morning, everyone. They asked me what song I wanted to come in on, and I thought that was a really appropriate one, given that. It's a real pleasure to be with you all. Good morning. Red, I'm sorry, I forgot the memo about the wings and the halo. Next year, I'll bring those. I just wore a jacket, so not nearly as cool. But I've got about 25 minutes or so to talk to you about customer experience, really customer love and focusing on the customer, and really how that translates to ROI. That's a really hard problem. I know a lot of you in this audience focus on customers, customer experiences, customer feedback, and a lot of times it can be really hard to tie that back to really driving, how does focusing on that drive concrete value? And I'm just going to relate some of my experiences over my career and some of the things that I think matter the most that really drive being customer-centric and customer-focused, and how those things have translated to value in the experiences I've been a part of. You know, at Accolade, where I am now, we have a great tradition of starting with a customer story or a customer quote in a lot of our company meetings and just meetings in general. And it just seemed really appropriate, given this audience and the theme of this whole conference and my talk, to kind of do the same. I think it's one of those small things that can have a big impact over time. It reminds everybody why you do what you do every day. And this is a quote from one of our Accolade users. We happen to be a tech-enabled service, and so we have a human component and a digital engagement component to what we do. I'll talk a little more about Accolade in a second. But this is a quote from one of our users, and I love those feedback loops, and always starting anything that I'm doing in the business with, let's remember why we're all here, who we're serving, and why that's important. This is an example of one of our customers who really felt some empathy from someone they were talking to at Accolade, it's a reminder, you know, for our engineers, for our UX people, for our salespeople, everyone in our company. These are always great reminders of why we do what we do and the ultimate measure of success of what we do. I want to just talk a little bit about who I am in my background, just to give you some context. I've been in software my whole life. I started my early career at Apple a million years ago. I was a software engineer. I worked on a product called MacWrite. Some of you in this audience may even know what that is. You're dating yourself like I'm dating myself right now, if you do. It was the first word processor for the Macintosh. I worked at Apple for a few years on that. I learned a lot about customer-centric software design and focus and feedback loops early on in my career and early on in the industry. I went on to co-found a company called Concur. Some of you may be users. Some of you may love or hate me for knowing that. No one loves expense reports. Hopefully we made it a little bit easier over time. But I was part of Concur from its founding in the apartment all the way through to our sale to SAP about 3 years ago. Getting to about 30 million users and about 15 million mobile users at the end. Over 1 million active users a day. Learned a lot about customer focus, customer feedback, customer love, and tying that back to business results. I'll talk a little bit about that. For the last 2.5 years, I've been in a company called Accolade as a chief product officer, really trying to bring some customer love to the healthcare experience for the US consumer. I think you can all agree that that's a place in our lives that needs some customer love. The customer love bar is pretty low in healthcare. Doing it through a tech-enabled service that we sell to corporations, but we serve consumers. So it's sort of a B to B to C type of business. And I'll talk about, we serve about 1.5 million people today. We're a few 100,000 mobile users. Mobile's a new consumer experience that we've introduced relatively recently. And I'll talk a little bit about that. That's kind of my background and gives you some context for what we'll talk about going forward. I always like to get to the punchline and then kind of work my way back in presentations like this. I'm a huge believer that when you focus on the customer, you focus on delighting that customer, and you focus on having a really high bandwidth, high functioning feedback loop with that customer, you drive real business results. And The company I'm at today is really interesting in that consumer delight and consumer engagement is actually one of the core selling value propositions we have to corporations that we sell to. So for us, really being customer focused not only drives ROI internally for us, making our software development more efficient, having more, we're having a much more efficient iterative cycle with our software development. It's also something that sits on our prospect sales decks and presentations. We're selling customer delight. We're selling employee NPS and employee engagement as one of the core value props to corporations. And so it is really embedded in what we do in my current job, both internally and also externally. And these are some of the core sort of value pillars that I live with every day. We save money for our customers. Building trust. Healthcare is one of those things where there's not a lot of trust, right? As consumers, we struggle to trust the insurance company. We sometimes struggle to trust our employer. Do they really have my best interests at heart? And if you're gonna try to deliver a consumer experience on top of all that, you need to have trust as one of your brands. And so it's a huge part of what we sell. We have extraordinarily high NPS with consumers. And so it's really at the center of what I do every single day. And as I'm gonna talk about 5 things that I think I've learned over my career that really sort of tie being customer-centric to value and some of the things that work. At Accolade, we're really lucky today. We have a mobile app that's got a 5-star rating. I will say it's been, Roby talked about this. I first discovered Apptentive at Concur. We were one of the first users. It was a core part of what made our mobile product successful there. When we built our mobile product at Accolade, Apptentive was at the core of it from the very beginning. I think the delight that we have with our mobile solution, some of you maybe have used mobile apps in the healthcare world. They don't have a great reputation there as being easy to use and delightful. Having a 5-star mobile app with hundreds of thousands of users is something I'm extraordinarily proud of. And I think a lot of that comes back to, do you really know who's delighted and who's not, and do you have feedback loops that make that happen? It's something that we've accomplished at Accolade that I'm really delighted with. But I want to just quickly go through 5 strategies that over my career have really worked well around being customer-centric. And I want to start with one that I think a lot of people miss. And in my experience, these are directly correlated to success. And the basic idea is that I think if you don't have employees that love working at your company, it's really hard to have customers that love your product. Those 2 things are highly correlated. I think that customer love does start at home. And when I say at home, I really mean there's very few companies I would submit that have extraordinarily delighted consumers or customers and have really unhappy employees. Those things end up correlating extremely highly. And I think there's multiple things about that are really important. One is, do you really care about how happy your employees are every day as much as you care about how much you love your customers? And also, is your customer love really embedded in how you think about your employees as well? Do your employees really value customer love as deeply as you do as a leader? I think those are extraordinarily important points. A lot of people skip over that step. And I think they're extremely highly correlated. And all the way to, and I think it's a loop. I think when you really focus on customer delight and you start delighting customers, it has a funny way of making your employees happier as well. Employees want to be successful, and a lot of being successful is serving your customers well and delighting them. And that feedback loop to me is extraordinarily important. And in my career, I have found that if one of those starts going south, the other one's going to go south, and they really play off of each other very closely. And so I think there's a lot of specific things that you can do to really make sure that loop is really tight and that you're focused on both. One of the most important ones to me is, have you really embedded customer love in the culture of your company or of your team? I think that matters a lot. At Accolade, we have cultural cornerstones that include really customer love, and are we taking care of customers? Roby told a story about sort of how we measure success as a company, the metrics that drive things like how we're bonused and how we grade ourselves as a whole company. Customer NPS is one of the core tenets of how we do that. Revenue, profitability, employee satisfaction, and customer satisfaction. Those 4 pillars define success. The health dashboard of Accolade is based on those 4 pillars. And customer love is one of those 4 pillars for us. If our customers are not delighted with the service we're delivering, we're not succeeding as a business. I would just submit, ask yourself in your company, is customer sat embedded that deeply in success? All the way to how people are bonused, how you think about, is the company even succeeding or not? We put all 4 of those pillars on sort of an equal weighting. And I think it bleeds into everything. Are you hiring the right people? I think that customer focus is one of the most important dimensions when I'm interviewing people, especially at the leadership level. I think those things really matter. I think when you want to really walk the walk of being a customer-centric organization, you've got to really look at those things and think about those things. So I think that thinking about employee delight and customer delight hand in hand and embedding that into how you operate is really important. Second thing I really wanted to speak about this morning is this idea of trust. I think trust and love are 2 words that are not very far apart from each other. And it's an interesting thing in the modern world. I think in a world of digital engagement, which a lot of you are really centered around, and I've been centered around in my career, digital engagement makes it really hard to build trust, right? There's not a human relationship there. There's a digital relationship, and trust can be hard to build. And I think trust is everything in the digital world. And it's really hard to earn. It's extraordinarily hard to earn, and it can be destroyed in an instant. And I think the biggest problem with trust in the digital engagement world is that it often gets destroyed without you even knowing that it's being destroyed. It's the worst thing that happens, right? You find out through the lagging indicator. You're losing users. You're finding out on social media. You're finding out in all these places that are too late. And I think it's an extraordinarily hard problem. I think it's one of the most important cornerstones. If you're going to delight consumers, they have to trust you at some level. And I think there's some key cornerstones around how you do that. And I think one of the most important is, do you have the listening mechanisms in place that are leading indicators, not lagging indicators? It's the most important thing, is that do your customers have a pathway to tell you that something's wrong before they go out to Twitter, or before they start talking to all their friends, or before you start creating a snowball? It's extraordinarily important, because you know what? Even the greatest companies that are great at delighting customers screw up sometimes and make mistakes. And I think feedback mechanisms that are in place that give you that feedback loop, you have to shorten that loop to the shortest degree possible. And I think solutions like Apptentive are a big part of how that happens. And I'll talk more about that in some of the other places where I think it matters, like meeting the customer where they are. Embedding that in the middle of the consumer experience that they're in the moment that they're having challenges, is extraordinarily important. The other thing is, I think being transparent is extraordinarily important in the digital world, perhaps even more so than in human relationships. If you screw up, you have to be honest about screwing up. Telling the truth and being honest. I think we live in an interesting world in the digital space, where I think trust is becoming a bigger and bigger issue. You know, privacy is one that gets a lot of attention today in the consumer space. But it's an issue no matter what your consumer experience is. I think trust is extraordinarily important. And transparency, holding yourselves accountable, being honest. But more than anything, having that feedback loop, in my experience, matters the most. I can think of many, many times when our software development teams found out something was wrong, that if we had not caught it then and course corrected right away, we would have had a 10x or 100x worse problem a month or 2 months or 3 months later. I can't say enough about how important I think that is. Which kind of leads to my third point, which is you really have to meet the consumer where they are. And a lot of you in this room really understand this extremely well. A lot of you focus on the consumer experience and making it delightful. Again, I think that this is one where, you know, technology and innovation, just in the digital world in general, keep changing the goalposts, right? I can remember very much at Concur, We had a solution that was run through a browser, and that's how everyone used our product. And, the iPhone got launched, not that, 10 years ago, 12 years ago. And we knew right away, this is something new. And if we can embrace it in the right way, we can transform our business. And we ran to it. We ran to it right away, and we're one of the first people to really adopt it in our business, in our industry, and do something interesting with it. And it changed our entire business in terms of engagement and customer sat, and a whole bunch of dimensions really exploded by embracing it. And you look in the modern world, and now the number of things that are out there that can change your consumer experience just keep multiplying. And I think you always have to be on top of that. But to me, more than anything else, when you look at the traditional ways you listen to your consumers and customers, they're pretty terrible. And I've been victim in the past of, you try email surveys or phone calls and things that, the feedback loops that are just really ineffective. And when you can embed those feedback loops as deeply as possible into the experience where the consumer already is, it makes all the difference in the world. And I've seen that over and over again in my career. The fourth thing I want to talk about is this idea of not just innovating for the customer, but innovating with the customer. It's really hard. Particularly those of you who are in the sort of B2C world, and you just have a lot of consumers out there that it's hard to know who they are. A lot of times they can be anonymous, hard to reach, hard to deliver a personalized sort of innovation loop with them. But I think, this is an area where, the strategies, the technologies, the techniques have just leapfrogged in the last decade. And there's a lot of things that we do. Accolade, we're really interesting being a tech-enabled service, and that we actually have 3 different customers. Some of you can can relate to having multiple customers. We have corporations that we sell to. That's a really important customer because they write checks to us. We have consumers that we serve. That's extraordinarily important because if we're not delivering that service, we're never going to sell to corporations. And then we have internal customers because we have a human component to our business, and we deliver technology to those people that serve our consumers. And they're a huge customer for us. They're a great customer to innovate with because they're in the same building we are, virtual building we are. They're the easiest to reach. And we've done a lot of really innovative things with our internal customers who are really sitting on the front lines, messaging our consumers, talking on the phone with our consumers. We've created what we call product innovation teams where we sit side by side. You have frontline people talking to customers, sitting next to engineers, sitting next to UX designers. And we're innovating together. We're getting that real-time feedback. That's really hard to do for our consumer customers. But we have a lot of things that we do. We do a lot of traditional things around usability testing. We do a lot of things around beta testing and A/B testing and pushing, finding out the customers that really love you and embracing them the most and seeking their feedback first and earliest. Lots of beta type testing, lots of let's see what they think because they're super prone to feedback and they're trusted lovers of our solution. I think it's one of the most important parts of our software development process is getting all of that right. Because again, the most expensive resource is that engineer writing code. And when you go down the wrong path and find out customers don't like what you did after the fact, you have wasted an insane amount of time and money and resource. And so in my experience, the more energy you put into having a really tight feedback loop and trying to innovate as best you can with that consumer, being in the loop from the very beginning. We do usability testing with wireframes and all the way back at the very beginning. And I find that the payback on those things is extraordinary. Because I've seen the other side. It's the power of the modern world, right? You launch a new feature to 1 million people. If it sucks, 1 million people are gonna have a sucky experience the second that it's launched. And there's ways to make sure that that doesn't happen, to minimize it. So I think finding those paths to innovate with your consumer is extraordinarily important. And the last thing I want to touch on, and then we'll open it up for some questions, is you cannot get enough feedback. There is no such thing in my mind as getting enough feedback. You don't want to overwhelm your customer, but there are a lot of paths to listen as to what's going right or wrong with your customer that can really, I find that you can triangulate those paths and they're going to tell a story to you. I think getting that direct customer feedback through products like Apptentive is absolutely critical. It's probably the best leading indicator that I have in my life. In my experience, it's the single best leading indicator. When a consumer has an experience that's either amazing or terrible or somewhere in between, if you give them an ability to tell you about that's really seamless, then it's right in the experience. It's the single best leading indicator you have as to whether you're doing the right thing. Again, going back to my first point, are you really listening to your employees? Sometimes your employees know that something's wrong even before your customers do. Do you have those listening paths in your culture with your teams and your employees to know how much, are they customer centered in the way that you want them to be? Are they delighted in what they're doing? Because, to me, when employees start having challenges, that's a leading indicator that you're going to probably have some customer challenges down the line. I think there's a really straight line to that. And then you have the lagging indicator, which is a lot of the brand love, right? Your employees can go out in public on places like Glassdoor, and your customers can go out to all the social media channels. That to me can't be your first place to go look. It has to be your last place to go look because it's too late. It's too late. That to me is not okay. When your Twitter feed's blowing up, it's you've missed the mark in my view. You have these other paths that are much better leading indicators about whether you're doing the right thing or not. But I think when I look at a customer health dashboard, these are the listening paths that better triangulate into a story that makes sense, and that's how I really think about it. You can't have enough feedback paths. So I'm just going to wrap and then open it up for questions, just kind of bringing it all together. These are a whole bunch of quotes from a whole bunch of Accolade customers that all have the word love in it. There is nothing that gets me out of bed in the morning more than seeing things like this. And I know that a lot of you in the room are like me. I've been focused on building software that delights users my whole career. And I learned at a really early age that there's something that happens to me when some person that maybe I'll never meet, that's in some other part of the world, got delighted by some software that I helped create. And it's a magical feeling. And when you do it right, when you have the right listening paths, when you have the right feedback loops, when you make it a core value that's really truly instilled in your culture, the results can be amazing and extraordinary. And I really hope that these 25 minutes or so have been useful in some way. I'm really excited to be here. I hope you really love this day. I know there's an extraordinary agenda. And thank you for listening, and I'd love to open it up for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. So if you submitted a question through the app, make sure to submit now if you have more, and then upvote and downvote other questions that you like or don't like. So Mike, the first question is, how have you been able to successfully engage employees to get them excited about customer love, especially for those who don't have direct contact with customers? It's
a great question. So we have a crazy mobile development team at Accolade. I was literally having a conversation with our lead developer yesterday. We get all of our engineering leadership together once a quarter, and we're kind of spread out all over the world. Actually, we have an office in Prague and Philadelphia and here, and they were all in town the last 2 days. And the lead developer for our mobile team is a pretty obsessive guy, and he literally goes through our App Store review comments every single week. He reads every single comment. He is plugged into the feedback we get through Apptentive. He's obsessed. He is absolutely obsessed with wanting to understand either what's right or what's wrong. And In my opinion, that's a personality trait at some level. Like you either love what you do and you love delighting the customer you're serving that much, or you don't. And so to answer that question for me, I seek those kinds of people out. I think when I think of the vectors of the attributes of the kinds of people that I want on my team, it's one of the most important ones. I will take someone with skills that might not be a great fit, but that has that thing about them over a lot of people with fantastic skills that don't have that level of passion for the customer. So I think a lot of it is honestly, do you have leaders like that? And that's infectious. Chris, our development lead, I see firsthand every single day walking and sitting with that team, that attitude it infects that entire team, infects it in an amazing way. I think it's one of the most important things that you can do is to have it's an attitude. It's an attitude. And part of what I can do as a leader is, am I building a culture that reinforces that says, I value that. That's important to me. It's important to our company. I value people like that. Super important.
Great, thank you. So the next question is, how do you avoid overwhelming your customers by asking them for feedback often? Two-part question. Second part, how do you avoid overwhelming your team with the amount of feedback that you get?
This is a hard question. It can be overwhelming. Let me answer the first part because it's really important. Because you can overwhelm customers and you can piss them off, right? I know if I get, when I stay at a hotel and I get 5 survey emails over the next 2 weeks, that pisses me off. I start getting turned off. It starts impacting my feeling about that brand at some level. That's not good. That's really that's something you have to be hypersensitive to. And for me, it comes back to that point. Make it seamlessly embedded in the experience. And the more passive you can make it, the more in line in the consumer experience you can make it. At Concur, we tried a lot of things, in our mobile app, the customer love dialogue was a magic thing that sparked a whole other level of feedback and engagement. Genuinely changed the level of engagement we got back from consumers with feedback. In our web app, we basically, when you submitted an expense report, there was a really passive dialogue that came up at the end that was more informational for the consumer and useful, but also had some feedback opportunities within it. And that proved to be successful. It's like if you don't want to give feedback, you don't have to give feedback. But here's a really seamless, easy way. I'm not getting bothered with an email. I'm given a passive opportunity to provide feedback. Worked extremely well. So I think you have to do those kinds of things. Trying not to overwhelm teams, that's a really hard problem. I think you have to be really efficient at how you present that feedback. That can be a hard problem. When you scale up to, at Concur we had 15 million mobile users. That's a lot of feedback. There's not a super simple answer to that one. I think for us, when you can distill it down to metrics, the getting textual feedback can be the hardest thing to scale, and trying to make that less. I'm someone who's obsessive. At Accolade, we probably get 2,000 to 3,000 text-based pieces of feedback from consumers every month. I'm one of those people that reads every single one of those pieces of feedback every single month, every single line item. Not everyone is like that. I find that people you trust, have them go through that and highlight the things that matter the most, good, bad, and otherwise, can be a useful way to do that. But there's not a super scalable, I haven't found a super scalable way to do that.
All right, last question, because we're short on time. So thank you so much for all of your questions. I know Mike has to take off shortly after he is finished. So if you see him in the hallway, feel free to grab him quickly. Otherwise, just tweet him using the hashtag, and we'll make sure that he sees those questions and can get you the answers. So Mike, last question. Please define feedback loop. Great question. I would say really simply, are you giving a forum for your customers to talk to you, to give you feedback on how you're doing? Sometimes that's a rating. Sometimes that's a, do you love me or not? Do you love my product or not? Right? The simplest form of feedback, yes or no. Sometimes it's clicking just a yes or no or a star rating.
Sometimes it's giving them really a chance to talk to you, a textual feedback, even voice feedback. That's part of it. That's only half of it. Feedback means you have a communication device back to that customer. When I'm a customer who says, I'm not happy or I'm delighted, do you have a really effective way to talk back to them in a way that's personalized, meaningful to them, relevant to the feedback they gave you? That's a true feedback loop. And again, the best feedback loops are the ones that are seamlessly integrated in the experiences you've already enabled for them. And you know, some of you have consumer experiences where there's super high, lengthy engagement, where maybe it's easier to create those channels. Some of you may have consumer experiences where they come in and out in 30 seconds or a minute, and it gets really hard to have that feedback loop. It takes a lot of really creative consumer experience thought, user experience thought, to try to solve that problem. I think it's the art of being great at it is all about how well you can design that experience. But to me, a feedback loop is gotta be two ways. Having customers tell you they love you is great, but customers at some point, especially if they're not happy, they want a feedback loop about how that's being addressed, and they want to know that they've been heard.
Thank you so much.
Great, thank you all very much.